Greetings, stranger, and welcome to Ghastly Tales. Here you will find stories to chill your bones, stop your heart, and tear at your very soul. Now, pull up close to the fire and listen closely, for tonight we bring word from the sea, from the inky, freezing abyss of Neptune's realm, where things vast and hungry and legion lurk still. These are the confessions of a deep sea diver. I recently left my job as a deep sea diver. I worked for a large company that offers diving services ranging from salvage, underwater demolition, ship repairs, and search and recovery. They are a reputable company and are considered safe and reliable. So much so that they are often contracted by the government. Truth be told, I will miss working for them. The people I worked with were truly the best of the best. But there are only so many unexplainable things you can witness in the deep before you decide to stay out of the ocean forever. Here are just some examples of the many secrets which divers take to their graves. On the way to a job we were contracted to perform, our propeller became fouled. I suited up and prepared to make a quick dive to remove the fouling. I did a brief inspection and located thick line wrapped around the prop and shaft. I notified the supervisor, who then lowered a canvas bag with the tools I needed to cut it off. I hung the bag from the shaft and began freeing the propeller. It didn't take long and I returned to my tool bag. I noticed a strange crunching sound when I dropped the tools in the bag. When I looked in the bag, it was full of large shells, many of which I had just crushed. After getting out of the water and stripping off my gear, I began to examine them. The shells had what appeared to be hieroglyphics etched into them. I learned from one of the senior guys that, while this wasn't common, it had happened to several of them before. On one other occasion, we were recovering a military aircraft. When we arrived, naval ships were on scene waiting for us to recover it for them. We were quickly briefed that they had lost communication with the pilot and wanted us to recover it so they could investigate. I was sitting comms and logs to communicate with divers and monitor depth and bottom time when the divers reached the project. They reported that the plane was intact. We were all surprised. The supervisor asked how extensive the damage was, and they explained it was completely intact. As in, there was no visible damage at all. It was just resting there on the bottom. Even stranger, the aircraft canopy was still in place. This means that the cockpit is still sealed. In other words, the pilot did not eject. But there was no sign of the pilot. We recovered the plane and the military took custody of it. We never heard about it again. I witnessed another strange occurrence from topside at the location of a planned demolition. It's necessary to explain that one way you can keep track of a diver is to watch their bubble stream. When a diver inhales, the helmet's demand regulator provides air from their umbilical. Then when they exhale, it is exhausted into the water and floats up to the surface. On topside you can watch the bubbles to get a general sense of where the divers are. Now, on this occasion we were hundreds of miles from land and had placed 2 divers in the water. About an hour into the dive, we started noticing something strange was happening. There were 3 distinct bubble streams coming from where they were working. At first we assumed that there was a current and it was affecting them, but soon we noticed a 4th set of bubbles coming from a distance. It stopped about 20 feet from the divers, near the other mysterious bubbles. We asked the divers, but neither of them could see anything out of the ordinary. Then, even from the surface, we heard a blood-curdling screech from the waters, then silence. The divers weren't too concerned. We hear strange things all the time. Sound travels well in the water and you learn to assume it's a long distance away. But soon, it looked like the water in the distance was boiling, and it was getting closer. It wasn't boiling though. It was countless new bubble streams, moving nearer to the location our divers were working. The supervisor ordered the divers to get into the dive stage to be lifted back to the surface. The bubbles were frighteningly close now, and the divers being lifted out said they had begun seeing shadowed figures in the distance. They couldn't quite make out what they were. We elected to pull the divers out without completing their decompression stops, and threw them into our hyperbaric chamber. During another dive near the Bahamas, I had a frightening experience. It was my first salvage job with them, so I got in with a highly experienced diver. At just over 200 feet, we were examining the surface vessel for rigging points. As I approached the bow of the ship, I noticed he was investigating a damaged portion of the hull. We swam a few feet into the ship, looking around. I asked him a few times if he wanted me to tend his umbilical from just outside the ship. It's highly advisable since it's dangerous to enter a sunken ship. To which he stated no. He didn't want to enter the ship. He insisted he was on the port side of the ship. Assuming he was disoriented, I reached in to grab him. Just before touching him, I realized there were no bubbles coming from the helmet. Whatever this was, it wasn't breathing. I backed up and reported that something else was down there. I expected mockery, but there was none. The next thing I heard was the diving supervisor.
"Both divers, square yourselves away and get ready to leave bottom."
When back on the surface, I asked the supervisor about it. He said he refused to put his divers in exceptionally dangerous situations. He then refused to clarify. We declined to complete the salvage. I'm not entirely sure how to explain this next dive. I was on bottom, laying on my back and staring up towards the surface. All I could see were varying shades of darkness. Suddenly, I came to my senses. I had no memory of how I got there. I realized I couldn't remember getting into the water, or even why I was here. I tried to will my body to stand up, but realized I couldn't move. I couldn't control my body. Over the comms I could hear Topside instructing the other diver to find me. How long had I been down there? How long had I been missing? I heard him tell Topside that they grabbed him. I tried to shout out, but I couldn't even do that. After a few frantic minutes of communication between the diver and Topside, I noticed a shadow growing clear. It was moving towards me.
"Topside, I found him."
He reached down and grabbed my harness to drag me back to our dive stage. As he pulled me, I rolled over and got a brief glance of my surroundings. I had been lying in a pile of human bones. One of the strangest things I've ever witnessed happened on a body recovery mission. Even I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't been the one in the water. The military had found a site in which they believed the bodies of several missing World War II sailors would be found. I entered the water with another diver, with body bags to carry the remains. On the bottom, we eventually found 3 skeletons. We placed them in the bags and returned to the stage. On our return trip to the surface, we saw the bags begin to move. At first very slightly, then violently shaking and rolling, and bubbles escaped from 2 of the bags and then they went still. The 3rd bag continued struggling. We reached the surface and sat down on the deck, stripping our gear immediately. We were afraid to touch the bags, but one of the tenders eventually unzipped the moving bag. An old, frail, very much alive man rolled out, coughing water. We stood shocked, unable to comprehend what we were witnessing. Still not sure what I was doing, I ran to the other 2 bags and unzipped them. There were 2 more old men lying motionless in the bags. They appeared to have just drowned. We attempted CPR but were unable to revive the men. The man, who was somehow now alive, was backing away from us, screaming of horrors he'd witnessed. He screamed about an eternity spent burning. We locked him in a room and contacted the military that we had found a survivor. Within the hour, a military chopper was hovering over us to pick up the 2 bodies and the survivor. We had placed the bodies back into their bags and handed them over. The man bent over to inspect them, unzipping the bags. As he opened them, an unbearable stench overtook us. The bodies appeared to be in decay, as if they'd been dead and soaking in the water for a week. He zipped it back up and had them lifted into the chopper. Then we escorted him to the survivor. We could hear the screaming from down the hall. We opened the door and saw blood splattered on the walls. He was alive and screaming, but he too appeared to have started decaying. The man calmly walked him to the chopper, and the two of them were lifted on board. We never heard about them again. I went back and examined the room. With his blood, the man had drawn hieroglyphics on the walls. I'm still not certain of what I viewed, but there were a few things that seemed to stand out. Waves, flames, and bodies. There was a tremendous number of them, but shortly after I walked in, our supervisor began scrubbing the walls. He refused to let us examine it any further. I've heard rumours about the Keepers of the Deep. I've wondered about them for quite some time. I believe they are the link between many of our stories. The myth within our team is seldom spoken of, but here is what I have gathered over the years. We are not meant to roam the depths of the ocean, and when a diver loses his life in the deep, it doesn't stay that way. They are cursed to forever roam the oceans, and when they find the living in an envious rage, they will bring you back to the depths from which they came. This has been a Ghastly Tales production. Story by Reddit user PizzND, narration by Martin Yates, and music by Michael Whitehouse and Kevin MacLeod. For full credits, please see the description. I hope you've enjoyed this reading. If you have, please subscribe to Ghastly Tales on YouTube, or stalk Ghastly Tales Presents on Facebook for more narrations, short films, true horrors, dark documentaries, and more. The sea is a paradox. Its beauty transcends description, a glittering firmament that joins earth and sky. People flock in their droves to immerse themselves in its embrace. From its depths we draw nourishment, its surface is a road to far-off lands. It is the cradle from which life emerged. The sea is beauty. The sea is life. It is also death. Drowning, freezing, death, and worse. Beneath its brilliant skin lie black landscapes, valleys, mountain ranges, festooned with crawling horrors unbeheld by the eyes of man. Great leviathans, red in tooth and tentacle, roam and drift in the black abyss. From the dawn of history to the present day, it has served as tomb for countless millions of human lives. And though we cross its thin shining surface in ships of iron and steel, the voids close below us are still as much a mystery as those far above. Good night, listener, and sweet dreams.